Good evening. Welcome to the meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee of City of York Council on the 28th of January 2021. This meeting is being broadcast live and will be viewable afterwards on YouTube, so welcome to all viewers, whichever way you choose to view the meeting. Now, I'm chairing the meeting tonight as Councillor Pavlovich, who is the normal chair, is unwell, and I'm sure all those present will join me in wishing him a speedy recovery. And Councillor Pavlovich has sent his apologies. Are there any other apologies for absence? I don't think there are. Moving on then to the second item, part of the item, which is, have any members any personal interests which are not included in the register of interest? If you have, could you just please declare them now? Nope, there are no disclosable interests. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on to the minutes, which are on page 1 to 12. These are the minutes of the two meetings held on the 20th of November 2020 and the 30th of November 2020. Would anyone like to move those minutes, please? Anyone prepared to move them? Thank you, Councillor Mason. Second, are they seconded by anyone? Thank you very much, Councillor Daubeny. Could I have votes in favour of that, please? If you could just show your hands. Thank you very much indeed.
Chair, I think you've missed that Councillor Webb was waiting to ask a question, I believe.
Sorry, Councillor Fisher. We've moved to this new, it's now a yellow hand on my screen. I don't know if that's changed for anybody else, not a blue hand.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just a question about the minutes.
All right.
Thank you. It's page 5 in the minutes. The Mazars officers responded to questions from members. The second bullet point, ongoing work in relation to severance pay to the former chief executive, would take into account public complaints if relevant and was unlikely to conclude before February 2021. Obviously, we've not made it to February 2021 yet, but I was wondering if we did have any update on what's going on and actually how we're going to address that in the near future.
Fine. Have we any updates? I had a briefing with officers, which obviously some information was passed on. Would anyone like?
So the Mazars have advised us that their inquiries are continuing, and in the work plan there is a provisional date of the 10th of March for a meeting of audit and governance if they feel and they're in a position to report back to this committee.
Thank you for that. So obviously when we come to the supplementary item on the agenda at the end under urgent business, we can look at whether or not that's going to be, we think that's, well, whether we need that or not. Okay. Are there any other questions about the minutes? Nope. In that case, we'll move on. If you're happy for me to do that. Moving on to public participation. Now, I understand we have one speaker tonight, Mr. Andy Mendes, who is going to speak on the minutes and matters relating to, apologies, I can't read what the other thing is, I apologise, I've scribbled it down, but my eyesight isn't up to reading it. But I'll pass over to Mr. Mendes. You have 3 minutes, and I will give you a warning when you're coming to the end of that time.
Okay, thank you. Evening all. I hope Gwenny is well. I haven't heard anything. I was surprised that I was the only one speaking. So here I go. Firstly, on the minutes or the work plan, once I found the work plan hidden in plain sight under urgent business, I noticed there's still no reference to the promised annual report on NDAs and related payments. So here's a repeat of what I said in November. On the work plan, I note that on the 6th of March 2019, it was agreed that HR would bring an annual report of non-disclosure agreements to the committee. I asked that this be added to the work plan on the 5th of February 2020 when I was still on the committee, but still don't see it on the forward plan. We also agreed that an update report on project management be brought forward to a future meeting. So what it's worth, I'll repeat what I said. My main point is on the Treasury report, not surprisingly, on Prudential Indicator 1 on capital expenditure. As ever, I note that the capital expenditure forecasts for years 3 to 5 are silly. Every year, Debbie tells me why this is necessary, but it remains silly to tail off in the way that it appears to. I also note that the forecasts have changed quite significantly between the half year and the full year this time. Is this a reflection of changing plans on the back of COVID or what? And just a thought that I don't think in my time that Audit and Governance ever saw the actual CapEx spends except as part of the annual accounts. And when things have calmed down, it would be helpful, I think, to run a report which shows how closely the Treasury forecasts have matched the actual capital expenditure incurred for, say, the last 5 years, or at Debbie's choice. And then my last comment on indicator 3, it highlights a big increase in the ratio between financing costs and net revenue streams. And the non-HRA element of this moves from roughly 11% to 18.5% over the 5 years, despite the unrealistic CapEx forecast for the last 3. Now, as I understand it, at this time there must be serious doubts about COIC's ability to collect business rates in full, while there remain, as we know, tight caps on domestic increases. Put this alongside huge revenue expenditure pressures that we all read about and hear about, and I wonder how we plan to find the extra money, and indeed what happens if we can't. That's it for me. Hopefully see you, or quote, see you next time. Cheers.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll obviously take those into account later. Can I just say this is the first time that one particular person has not appeared at public participation. I genuinely hope that the person concerned is well and not ill for any reason. Okay, moving on now to item 4, which is amendments to the Constitution by the Monitoring Officer. If you'd like to take that, please, Janie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a report to highlight that since we last met, the government issued further health protection regulations to provide for actions to be undertaken by public health and public protection in response to the changing in tier systems and the lockdown. So listed there as the health protection coronavirus restrictions, all tiers regulations, which came on the 2nd of December, the health protection coronavirus restrictions number 3, and all tiers England amendment regulations, which enacted on the 6th of January 2021. These have been included in the relevant scheme of delegation for public health and the public protection team to allow them to enable various activities to deliver their service to be undertaken. These will be reported at a future meeting of full council and incorporated into the Constitution, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from members on that item? Nope, they don't appear to be, so thank you very much for that report. That's obviously uncontroversial. So moving on to agenda item 5, which is the large report on the scrutiny of Treasury mid-management year review and Prudential indicators 2021. Are you taking that one, Debbie?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So this is your mid-year review that was presented to Executive in November 2020, but it was delayed coming here due to changes in the work plan. So whilst COVID has clearly had a huge impact on the country and the finances of the council, it's actually had a fairly limited impact on Treasury management function. The main issue has been the challenge of accurate cash flow forecasting in light of sort of relatively last minute and urgent decisions from government in relation to things like business rates, where we've had to pay out a lot of money very quickly, or we've received large sums of money from government to then pay out to businesses very quickly. It'll come as no surprise, I guess, to any of you to know that investment returns remain low and are expected to remain that way for some time. We have now started to reduce our cash balances as expected and forecast in previous years, and therefore we have started to borrow again, which I've outlined, I think, in paragraph 8, the position on long-term loans. So they were the main things to draw to your attention. I think the other points, if I could just pick up some of the points that Mr. Mendes mentioned earlier regarding the position in future years. I don't disagree necessarily that the future years particularly once you get to years 4 and 5, are unlikely to be, when we get to those years, those numbers are not intended to be a forecast. They're a reflection of what the current approved capital programme is. So it's not the intention that what you see in year 5 of this is a forecast of the capital expenditure in that year. It's to allow you to see the impact of current decisions in future years as much as anything else. Clearly, I and none of us can know what the administration in 5 years' time is likely to be thinking in terms of its capital investment priorities or the current level of investment. And whilst we could look at I think Mr. Mendes mentioned about showing how closely the Treasury forecasts have matched actual capex. Again, I've made the point it's not intended to be a forecast, so that I'm not saying that's what the capital expenditure is going to be in 5 years' time. It's saying that's what the current approved capital spend is. So yeah, I would leave it at that point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Members, any questions? Nope. Right, so happy to receive that report. Thank you. Moving on now to item 6. I think this is another one for you, Debbie, which is scrutiny of the Treasury Management Strategy Statement and Prudential Indicators for 2021, 22 to 2025 to 26, which are on item pages 33 to 36 of your agenda.
Right, thank you. So this is the Treasury Management Strategy Statement, and you are receiving this for scrutiny prior to it going to Executive on the 11th of February as part of the suite of budget reports. So the strategy itself is broadly the same as last year. It's pretty much unchanged. We've updated it for an additional year, obviously, on the capital programme on the 5-year plan, but there have been no changes to the overall strategy. Sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. There will be, we are still working on this document actually as we finalise the budget proposal. So there will be, the version that goes to Executive is likely to have some small changes to some of the numbers in the Prudential indicators, but nothing significant and nothing that makes a vast difference to the direction of travel. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you once more. Any questions from members on this? I had a number of questions, but they were all very helpfully dealt with by Debbie in the pre-training at 4:30, so that's cleared what I
think Councillor Webb would like to ask a question, Chair.
Sorry, I haven't got a hand.
I think Councillor Webb has physically put his hand up. I think he'd like to ask a question, sorry. Chair.
I was looking at the blue screen. That's fine. Councillor Webb, fire away.
Sorry, Councillor Fisher, I catch you both ways there. Well, firstly, I couldn't make the pre-training session, so you might well have already covered this or not covered this. I don't know. But to be honest, I think it's probably right that things are covered in public anyway. In the on page 41 of the report, you've got the paragraph 24, Prudential indicator number 1, and you've got a little table there. And what I was doing was I was comparing that with the mid-year one from the annex from the previous item, and I noticed that the numbers are very different. And I was wondering if you could just explore just a little bit about why those numbers are different, how they fluctuate over year. Obviously, they do tail off as we've sort of seen, but how is that working? So yeah, if you could just explore that table a little bit, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I can't actually get both tables alongside each other on my screen at the moment, which is what I was trying to do. But the capital expenditure will alter between years. So there are some significant capital expenditure ongoing out there in this financial year. We've just completed the stadium, we've got the Guildhall ongoing, we've got some major schemes that are nearing completion. So the changes will reflect the forecast of slippage. So a lot of the current year's capital programme has already slipped, and more is forecast to slip at Monitor 3, and we would expect more to slip again at Outturn, frankly. So that's partly as a result of COVID. So, you know, some things were paused, weren't they, for a period. And it is an area where we definitely need to improve our profiling of capital expenditure over the 5-year programme. There is a tendency that I think for probably an optimism bias rather than a realism bias, put it like that, shall we say, where you know, at the start of the project you would anticipate that you're going to complete it within a certain time scale, but inevitably things happen and therefore the expenditure might get delayed, or you know, other issues like that. So it really is just reflect the capital program, as you'd expect, is a kind of a living program. It's a dynamic program and things are changing all the time, so that things slip between years. But over the 5-year program, they should remain, you know, that they're moving between years rather than coming out of the program.
So based on that, then, so for example, the top line is the sort of the general funds, 76.9 million in this sort of year coming, but then the suggestion from the mid-year, which obviously wasn't that long ago, is 102.5 million, and so that's a sizable chunk of difference.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, I think what's happened is that has slipped into, because it was 99 and now it's 138, so I think that has slipped there. But that sort of, from a management point of view, that's quite a shift in quite a short space of time.
Yeah.
And is it, how's that? Is it just because they've slipped, or what?
It's because of slippage, and that's the bit where the area that we need to improve on particularly is to get better at profiling over between those years, because I haven't got the detail of which schemes have slipped in front of me. We are just doing that. So when you see the executive papers are published next week and you see the Capital Monitor 3, you will see the detail of which schemes have slipped. I would suspect that we would have known that those schemes were going to slip much earlier in the financial year, and therefore, had we been better at splitting those in the relevant year, there would have been no need for that slippage, because we could have probably reasonably forecast that expenditure wouldn't happen in this financial year anyway, and should have been placed in next year. So it's just a case of when the scheme is first approved through the budget, inevitably a lot of that goes in the next financial year. And then as the scheme is developed, it then gets spread over future years. So it's not satisfactory. I'm not saying that it is satisfactory, because it's not. It makes life quite difficult in terms of when you're looking at the prudential indicators, because you need them to be accurate, and you need to have a much better estimate of what you've got. And a worst case scenario, that would result in us potentially borrowing additional funds to fund capital expenditure. And then if that capital expenditure slips, that means we've borrowed unnecessarily early and therefore incurred additional interest, because we've borrowed earlier than we need to. So it's definitely an area where we need to look at, and we need to get some improvement in.
And just a final point on this, from sort of a governance point of view, you've said we need to get better at it. Is there anything clear that we could actually do to get better? Is there something missing from the structure? How does it work?
I think it's just a bit more rigour at the point that we're putting the capital programme together. So we need to do it much earlier in the year. So when you're seeing that we've had a big push during this year to ask managers to do a much more realistic forecast of their expenditure, so that we can really get behind that detail. So you'll see there's a lot of slippage at Monitor 3, and that's because we've had that push. So we're going to continue with that push to make sure that we get the right amount in the right year. What we tend to do is look at the 5-year programme and make sure it's within the 5-year programme, and then move it around within that 5-year programme. And that's okay. That's not a terrible thing necessarily. It's just we shouldn't really wait until Monitor 3 to make sure that we've moved that expenditure around. So we're putting the budget together, and we'll make sure that at Monitor 1, so the first quarter of next financial year, we need to make sure we've got it all moved in the right year, so that we do that early on in the year rather than leaving it to Monitor 3.
Thank you very much indeed. Any further questions? Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Debbie, as always, making all of this make far much more sense than it does when you first read the words that sometimes feel like a different language. It's always appreciated. I'm just wanting to ask a little bit about the management of risk in regards to investment policy. So I'm looking at page 51 in the bundle, paragraph 73, and you know, onwards from there, about how decisions are made. And I understand from what you talked about earlier, decisions are made on a very regular basis about investment, and it talks here about the decisions being made by the Section 151 officer, but the Section 151 officer is one person. So is there a process, if you like, for them delegating those decisions? Is there some oversight? How does that happen? Assuming that we don't have staff who work 24/7.
Yeah, well, that's partly what this strategy sets out, the parameters in which I can operate as the Section 151 officer. So these, the strategy that you set is what allows me to make those decisions through the year. And so there are within the finance team a number of people that will look at cash flow and look at what investment we might want to make. So I suppose the other point I'd make is when we're talking about investments here, this isn't about buying commercial property or buying shopping centres and those kind of maybe high profile things that you might read about local councils doing. This is about treasury management investments. So this is about any surplus cash flow that we might have for whatever reason, where we would invest that in banks and building societies. So we would essentially tie that up, put it in a bank or a building society or a money market fund for a set period of time to get interest. And that's all very regulated through the Prudential Code, through the guidance, the MHCLG guidance on treasury management. But on a day-to-day basis, we use Link Asset Services, who are our treasury management advisors, and we use their creditworthiness index. So when we know we've got surplus cash to invest, and that's not a surplus as in we don't need it, it's that it's surplus in that we don't need it right now, but we might need it in a month or 2 months' time, then we will look at their creditworthiness policy and we will assess the criteria. So as we all know, security, liquidity, yield, and then ethical, social and governance. And we will go through those criteria. We would look at the banks and building societies. We would look at who were our counterparties that we would invest with because they meet our criteria. We would look at how long we would put the money away for, depending on our cash flow forecast. And then we would look at what yield we can get from that. So it's quite a regulated process that is done by members of the finance team on a day-to-day basis. And then myself or another 2 senior managers in finance would do the relevant authorisations of that. Does that answer your question, Councillor Lomas?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. I would just comment that I think the fact that councils can no longer make capital purchase to produce yield is a great thing, because there have been several cases well documented about councils buying property to produce revenue to reduce their council tax, which obviously sometimes can be very high risk, and I think this council has not done that, and I think that's the right strategy. Councillor Dobney, I noticed you waved your hand after I called Councillor Lomas. Do you wish to speak?
Please. I was just going to ask Debbie if COVID has had a large effect on the accuracy of the planning of this area.
Yeah, yes, it has. So as you can imagine, when we're doing the daily, we look at Treasury every working day. We don't do it on a Saturday and a Sunday, but every working day, it's kind of the first job of the day of the team to look at Treasury and see where we are in terms of cash. And whilst I mean, COVID's had a large range of impacts across people and their lives and all sorts of organisations, but in relation specifically to Treasury, the 2 main impacts that have been the cash flow forecasting has been incredibly difficult. So partly due to some of the sort of relatively last minute decisions by government in terms of paying grants to us for us to pay out to businesses, things like business rate reliefs, that understandably, it's not criticism, have been done very quickly and often at the last minute. So we've often not known that we were getting significant chunks of money until it's arrived in our bank account. which has been difficult, and we've had to pay that out very quickly. So that's been difficult as well. And I guess the other main impact, although we were seeing this pre-COVID actually, is the impact on our rate of return. So bank rate being incredibly low. And again, you know, there was some talk earlier on in the year, wasn't there, of interest rates possibly being negative, and that talk is still moving around in the background. I think the Bank of England have been clear that they don't want that to happen. They don't think that's the right thing to happen. But all that kind of uncertainty around how much cash we've got on a day-to-day basis, what payments we're going to have to make out next week or the week after, because generally we've got quite a bit of certainty around what income we're getting in and what cash we're paying out. And we haven't had any of that this year. So cash flow planning and then the lower rates of return, I think, have been the two main impacts.
Right. Thank you very much.
Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sort of doing a bit of a comparison again, Debbie. I think with top of page 44, paragraph 40, the Prudential Indicator 3 is looking at essentially the ratio of financing costs to net revenue stream. And I noticed that in this part of the document, there's almost, it's a 12.4, 12.3-ish, 12.33% on the HRA, and that's consistent for the next sort of 5 years. Whereas previously, it's actually dropping. It's not dropping by a lot, you know. It's about 1% and a bit or something. But there's certainly a change there. And I was just wondering, in the sort of the previous item, you know, if that percentage is dropping slightly, what does that mean? Obviously, because that term is sort of the borrowing cost over sort of rent incomes or against rental income, isn't it? So if that fraction, that ratio is decreasing, what does that mean? But then actually in the prediction for the next 5 years in the new bit, it's saying that actually it's remaining constant. So which is it, and what does it mean?
Yeah, can I take that one? Can I take that one away and come back to you, because I haven't got that. That you're right actually, and I haven't got an answer ready for that because I hadn't picked that up. So can I come back to you on that separately? Sorry about that. I can't answer that right now.
Yeah, I guess. Thank you.
Sorry.
We'll award a gold star for Councillor Webb for catching the teacher out on that one.
Yeah, read it all and everything.
Yeah. Are there any other questions from members on this section of the report? Nope. In that case, thank you for your report. Are you happy to receive that report?
Oh, Councillor wanting to say.
Can I ask a question, Tony?
Yeah, of course you can. Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, it was on that same table, so the top of page 44, and it was really the question that Mr. Mendes was asking earlier. So if the percentage ratio of the cost of financing the borrowing is going up compared to the revenue stream, do we think there is a risk about how we're going to be able to repay this?
No, because I mean, there's clearly a risk with any capital investment, isn't there? But if you look at the future and things like the York Central Enterprise Zone, where the council will be allowed to retain all business rates in that area, that's slightly different. And that if we didn't think that the business rates would be generated, we wouldn't be making the investment without considering that. So, I mean, hopefully, well, it should be. So if you look at these kind of investments over a 50-year term, then the pandemic's a kind of a relatively small blip, isn't it? Hopefully in the midst of that 50-year term. Could be famous last words, don't blame me if that is the case. So there isn't, you know, these things are monitored on a regular basis. So we wouldn't be making the investment, particularly for those schemes where I think, as I mentioned in some of the capital monitoring reports during the year, and particularly in light of the capital programme, we do keep a very close review on the business case for any capital expenditure schemes where they are funded from future income streams. So we keep a very close eye on that and make sure that those risks are identified and monitored. So if there were schemes that were going ahead that were to be repaid from something like business rates, we would make sure that we had more certainty before incurring that expenditure.
Sounds happy with that, Councillor One? Good. Councillor Webb.
Yeah, it's just a follow-up on that, really, on this table. Obviously, the current administration is quite keen to talk about the increased number of council houses or council houses, which surely would then lead to an increase in council house revenue or housing revenue. And I was just wondering how that should play out in these figures, because, you know, how does that compare to, and how is that included in these figures? Because it doesn't look like we are seeing a net rise. I'm not sure.
In terms of the housing rental income?
Yes. So obviously, if there was more houses, you'd expect there'd be more income, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but it would in theory be a net nil, wouldn't it? Because you'd have more capital expenditure as well. So the income from tenants would cover the additional kind of management time and cost, the additional ongoing future repairs. So you wouldn't need any repairs, would you, in theory, with a brand new house, but you would over the lifetime, and it would also go to offset the cost of borrowing to build those properties in the first place. Yeah,
so that's kind of where my question lies, is in that first bit. Obviously, if there's the borrowing going on to actually build them in the first place, surely that you'd see more of sort of an impact from that first bit.
I think at the minute, though, because we've got a significant balance in the housing revenue account, that we're not borrowing at the moment on the housing revenue account to build those properties, we're again running down the balance. Well, that's what the balance is there for, isn't it? To both build those new properties and to deal with any to repay future debt. So I think in time you will see that once we've used the HRA balance. But at the point that we've used the HRA balance, that's when we would again look and make sure that, I mean, not that we don't do this already, because we do, but schemes have got to kind of be sort of wash their own face, so to speak. So it's got to be the income, the income generated has got to cover the cost, so that it's not an additional burden on the rest of the rent payers or the general taxpayer.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Webb? Good. Any further questions? I'll give you a little bit longer this time, then if a blue hand does pop up. Nope, I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm happy to receive that report from the Section 151 officer. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on now, we have, finding my agenda, we now move on to urgent business, which is a review of the work plan. Who's going to take this one?
So, Chair, I can. So okay. I'd like to apologise why it was an oversight, why it wasn't included with the main agenda. The additions from the work plan then, since you last had chance to view this, is that there is an addition for a provision for, external audit to report in March, should they be in a position to do so. So at the request of the committee on the last occasion, we've put that date in, and that is provisional at the moment. And also there's an addition for April's meeting as well, which is approval of the internal audit plan. As you'll recall, Verito have already consulted with yourselves on the internal audit plan, and they need to come back with approval of it in, I think we've put that in April's section of the meeting. And obviously there is the kind of floating item from myself as well, which is the kind of the review and restructure of the council's constitution, which was needing to be done. And so that is on a date yet to be fixed, and I need to consult with Councillor Pavlovic and yourself around fitting that into the programme, but I anticipate it will be somewhere in April. Given the experiences of the meeting in March 2020, just before lockdown, where it took about 4 hours to go through the dotting I's and crossing T's, Councillor Pavlovic is currently of the view that it might be a separate meeting with a single item agenda, because it wouldn't be fair to other items on the agenda. That was his initial observations when we spoke from the physical meeting that we had in March 2020, if you members recall. It was quite a lengthy evening. So I'll continue when Councillor Pavlovic is in a better state of health. I'll continue to consult with him about that, but that is the indication at this present time.
Okay, any members got any questions? Councillor Lomas.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Janie, for that. It's just a request, really. I think because there's so many different things happening, can we have the work plan as a standing agenda item?
It will be.
Forward?
Yeah,
Oh,
we
good.
had asked that. It was literally just an oversight,
Right,
sort of like
great.
human error on this occasion. That's why it's an urgent item. We all noticed it and then realised it wasn't on. So it was provided, it just got missed off. So it will be a standing item going forward. Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Could I just ask a question? I mean, we've had a number of changes, modifications, updates on the Constitution. Is a broader review of the Constitution with a review to whether or not the present system of governance is actually most appropriate? Is there any potential for that to be done?
So the first stage is looking at the Constitution, which is updating what we currently have, yeah, and the structure of the framework that we currently have. And the second phase of that will be looking at the actual structure of the council's corporate governance itself. So that is two separate pieces of work, and both of which are quite significant. It was felt, however, that looking at the Constitution, building on from the dotting I's and crossing T's experience that we had, and also issues that have arisen during the lockdown with urgent decision making, the delivery of meetings, remote meetings, the coronavirus legislation, etc. It was felt that actually we probably needed to just concentrate on the current Constitution, because there's so much happening and we needed an up-to-date version of it.
I fully appreciate that COVID has thrown a lot of spanners in the works in lots of areas of where government is working. And I take that on. But obviously I would like eventually to have a look at the Constitution. That also depends, of course, on what happens with local government reorganisation, because obviously if that goes ahead, and we may be completely wasting our time on that.
Yeah, so we need a Constitution regardless of local government reorganisation, but obviously outcomes, I can't predict outcomes of local government reorganisation, and there's devolution as well, and both of those would have significant impacts or cause question of the framework of our decision-making processes. So yes.
Completely agree. Okay, any further questions on the work plan? No further questions. In that case, there being no other further business, as long as everyone is happy, I think we can close the meeting. That must be a record for audit and governance.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Confirm the live stream.